Hello and welcome to the online edition of Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai Lit Fest, in association with NCPA, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Safari, powered by Godrej and Kotak. In this session, Landscape of Loss, we will be discussing the novel Pearl, which was on the long list for Booker Prize 2023. And to unveil the power of her words, we have the author Hughes, who is an award-winning poet and runs a small community bookstore. Joining her is poet, editor, translator, and author Jerry Pinto. The screen is all yours, Jerry.
Hi, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Hughes because her book, The Pearl, is one of the best that I've read this year. It concerns a missing mother in the sense that Margaret vanishes into the blue and her family is left to deal with the aftermath. I wanted to know, Sean, to start with, you are a very fine poet. I've just read some of your poems. What made you decide to take on the novel as a form?
Ooh. Well, I always had the ambition of writing a novel. And really that ambition came from wanting to write a response to the medieval poem Pearl. I didn't want to translate the poem. I didn't really feel it was translatable. It was so complex. It's so perfectly made. Everything in it is counted. You know, every syllable, every rhyme, everything. But I wanted to write a response to it in another form. And so I chose the form of the novel. And that's sort of where my ambition to write the novel came from, was being inspired by a poem. But obviously that did lead to quite a lot of problems in trying to construct the novel, more than I had thought it would, yeah.
Tell us a little about the Pearl, because I think most of the viewers might not be familiar with the medieval poem that might have also been by Gawain and the Green Knight and all that. Yeah? So tell us a little about the poem and specifically about your encounter with it and your responses to it.
Yeah, so I first was shown this poem when I was a student, so a very long time ago. And it's in the same manuscript as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a much better known poem because it's an adventure story, and that's been translated into children's books and films, and it's sort of much more known in different formats. And the Pearl is a sort of meditation on grief. A father goes to a graveside of his young daughter, and he falls asleep. He hears beautiful music, and he smells all the healing plants and herbs that are planted on her grave, and the music and the scents that he has take him into a sort of dream where in his dream he meets his dead daughter, who has grown up from a toddler. He says in the poem that she wasn't 2 when she died. But he meets this young woman who she's become in heaven, and she tries to teach him how to accept her death. But he can't accept it, and he's so happy to see her again. He can't face going back to his real world and waking up without her. He just can't face being there without her. So he tries to cross the river. He tries to dive into the river of death to cross over to where she's on the other bank. But of course, he's not allowed to. He's not allowed to make that choice. And so when he goes in the water, he wakes up and he finds himself back in the graveyard, just as lost and bereft as he was to start with. So it is a religious poem because the little girl sort of recites religious doctrine to him, telling him how he should accept her death. But it's also really a very, very personal poem because he doesn't accept her arguments. He can't accept that it's possible to live with it. So I've always found the poem like really moving. It's like a sort of cage of words, really. The stanza is literally like a room. Each section of it is almost as if the writer thinks, well, if I make this as perfect as possible, it will somehow contain this emotion that can't be contained. So I think it's a really, really perfect piece of work. And then I realised after I'd read it that it was written where I grew up. The reason it's really hard to read now is it's written in the dialect that was spoken in the northwest of England, which is exactly where I live. And so I felt this big connection with the poem just because it was so beautiful. But then I also thought it sort of belonged to the same landscape that I belong to. I placed it very much in my home village. And in my imagination, this poem happened down the road from my house. And so the setting of the riverbank and the places in the poem, to me, they've always felt like they belong where I belong. So I felt this sort of strong relationship with it.
So, in your novel, you flip this. It is not
Yeah.
a parent mourning the loss of a child. It is a child mourning the loss of a parent. And
Yeah.
in the poem, there is a tangible place, a site where grief may be expressed. Whereas in your novel, grief becomes kind of like the landscape because there is no place where it may be expressed. So for me, the grief in the book was like a forest fire. It was taking everything in its path, burning allergies into the baby, this wrecking the father's career, uh, knocking the young woman sideways so that she begins to hurt herself and starve herself. This grief, how did you come upon the idea of this flipping and the intangibility or the permeation of grief?
Well, I suppose I let the characters lead me into different directions, really, is what happened. I did have these characters in my mind for a really long time, but I didn't have a story for them. So I knew the building, but I'd never been inside it. I'd cycled past it. It's really near my village. And I'd invented these people that I'd put in it. And I just sort of played with them in my head. It's like these people, I knew how they'd met and what they said to each other. And they just sort of lived with me for years and years and years. I didn't have a plot for them. But then in my early 20s, a good friend of mine took his own life by drowning. He went into a river. And I was so shocked by this choice that he'd made. I was so shocked that it was him. It just, if you'd asked me to guess who's the least likely person I'd have said him. Least likely, this person had everything to live for. It's an impossible choice. And obviously I was very young at the time and I didn't know things about, male risks for mental health and all those things. Those are things that I've learned, later in life. So I took all the names of these characters who I'd invented in my little house in my head, and I wrote their names on a piece of paper. I closed my eyes and I pointed my pen to the paper. And whoever the pen fell on, I would make them go into the water. And I was really horrified at who the pen fell on. Obviously, I did really love all these characters. I didn't really want to destroy any of them, but I especially loved that character, I think. She had a lot of my mum in her. She had a lot of my mum's close friends. She was very sort of tightly tied up with my memories of my mother and growing up in the village. And when my pen fell on that name, I was like, I can't write that. That's dreadful. What an awful story. Who would ever want to read that? That's just terrible. How could you do that? And then I sort of thought about it for a long time. And I thought maybe if I missed the character, which I do miss that character. I thought if I miss the character while I write this story, maybe the readers will miss her too. So maybe that is the story that I need to write. Because if you want to write a story that is convincing about the act of missing somebody, how that act becomes you, and how that world of missing someone becomes the whole missing world that you inhabit. I thought maybe if that's what I want to write about, I should just go along with this terrible random decision of the pen, which obviously Freud would say wasn't random at all. He would say I did it on purpose, but I promise I didn't cheat. I promise I didn't cheat. And it never ever occurred to me to go back and like choose somebody else.
Uh,
I stuck with it.
What a
So that's sort of
wonderful-
how it ended up being flipped.
What a wonderfully medieval way of choosing something by
Maybe. Yes.
depending on
Yes. I
oracular
mean,
wisdom or something.
yeah. Well,
So-
I wanted to express how random it felt. And I think as I've grown older, I've sort of come to embrace that randomness a bit more, that I can accept that a bit more. That when something tragic happens, it does always feel random.
Oh.
And I think I was just very young when I made a choice in that way. And I was thinking, well, that's ridiculous. You know, how can that be a plot? It's too, you know. But then as I've grown older, I've realized that a lot of the important plots in our lives, a lot of the important losses or momentous changes that happen, do really feel shockingly random. And maybe that's just a very difficult thing to write about in literature, because obviously in a book, you expect there to be reasons for things in a way that there isn't in life.
Yeah.
You know, when something happens at the start of a book, you're thinking, this is a useful plot thing. This is going to come back later and they're going to explain it and it's all going to make sense. When things happen to you in your life all the time that make no sense, don't connect to anything else, don't lead to a resolution, and not relevant to your plot. So it's very difficult to sort of introduce the random, I think, effectively into literature.
There's the construction of the missing mother is a construction built out of trace. It's literally like the daughter and the readers are trying to reconstruct this woman out of like the
Yeah.
memory of her laughter, the unraveling of a sweater, the smell of gardening, elements of her that we are being made to put together. And I think the absences are therefore make the character that much stronger. Did you sort of bargain for the absences? Sort of actually creating space where I can put my missing mother, or anybody who's lost someone can invest themselves. Was that, you think, the idea somewhere?
I don't think so. I think that was just a natural process to me. That partly because of the poem, partly because of being inspired by the poem, that in the poem the person who is grieving is transported into a world where he can try and communicate with the dead through like really faint things, just the smell of the plant that he's trodden on, the scent that it's released, or a song that he hears in the air, even though it's silent. So it's like he's clutching onto these little tiny things that will be like the key to this person and bring her back to him in some form. And I sort of wanted the ghostly element of the book to operate in that way, that for me, the smells of the mother's garden and the herbs that she planted that have run wild and pop up everywhere, that to me was my way of talking about the way the grief runs underground everywhere, and that the presence of the mother can be sort of summoned by the slightest thing. But it was also, I think that came about because I moved back to my home village shortly after my mother died a couple of years ago. And when I moved back to the village, I was surrounded by things that all meant my mother to me, because I was in her home. I wasn't just in the village she was buried in. I was in the place where she'd been happy. And like every hedgerow, every field, every lane corner, everything was connected to her. So, and she told stories and sang songs all the time. So everywhere that I went, the landscape that I lived in, like was sort of full of stories to me. everything I looked at was telling me a story or singing me a song. And so I felt not like a sort of ghostly presence of my mother, but I felt that surrounded by her because she was in nature, if you like.
You take a great risk, I think, with your central character being so unambiguously self-involved, really. You
Yes,
she
I'm
was,
young and annoying. Young and annoying. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, I
Yes, she
mean,
does.
it's a wonderful description of anyone who's dealt with a teenager, I think, and a wounded
Mm.
teenager, and that would probably recognize this. But when you were building her character, were you aware that you might, just stand to alienate the reader from her entirely?
Just to make people too annoyed with her because she's being a damaged, annoying teenager who doesn't do the things she said she was going to do and doesn't go to the places she ought to go to and messes up school life and everything. Yes, yeah, I did think that ran the risk of being slightly annoying because teenagers really are slightly annoying. Let's face it. So that's always a risk, isn't it? But I wanted to make the narrator older at the time of telling, so that when she describes herself as being quite annoying and unreliable and causing trouble for her father and not being helpful with her brother, etc., she is the one telling that. So she has reached an age, she's 40 when she's telling the story, and she's talking about when she was 13, 14, 15, and an absolute menace. But she is the person telling it. So she's telling it with self-awareness and she's self-deprecating. And I think that the reader can see that she is very lovable and that her own version of herself, when she's describing herself like quite harshly, she gives quite a harsh account of herself. But I think the reader feels more warmly towards her than she does towards herself at that point. And the reader, as an adult reader, is reading about her troubled younger years with some sympathy and maturity. And obviously, I hoped that the narrator, as she grew older, that she would learn to be a bit kinder and more forgiving to herself.
There is in the second half of the book, I think, a great deal of wisdom, hard-won wisdom, I think, because there's that moment where um, she's kept a door open somewhere for herself, as if as if her life might be more livable if she could be sure she might escape it. But she's also very aware of what the consequences of that escape might be. So there's a lovely passage where she talks about 21 being the kind of time when a child might be ready, and then she says that she wanted her mother even more when she was pregnant. So maybe she should stick around for. And I really found that a very moving passage because she's kind of talking herself into a into a corner, literally. But it's
Yeah, she's talking herself into staying alive, isn't she? She had to constantly renegotiate that contract with herself that, oh, maybe I really should stick around a bit longer. Maybe there's still something useful I could do. And obviously this is partly linked to research that says that where there's been somebody in the family who you're very close to who takes their life, or a close friend, that you are more at risk if you're in that category, because that possibility has been opened up for you. So part of the sort of jeopardy of the novel is that this woman has had to live her whole life with that possibility having been opened to her, which makes it a very dangerous part of her mind. And so she has these sort of constant renegotiations with her life, with assuring herself that it's a much better plan to stay with it. Yes, I did wonder about putting that whole section in, actually. That sort of went in the book and I got thrown out, and it got back in again, I got thrown out. And in the end, my editor at Indigo said, no, I want you to leave that one in. Leave that there, I want you to leave that one in. And I said, but isn't it terribly taboo? Am I not going to be in terrible trouble for this? That this young person who has like responsibilities and things, that she could even have to make this negotiation. Is this just not going to make her horrible to people? And my editor said, no, that's my favorite bit. I like her best there. I was like, okay.
It did actually strike me very strongly because it did seem as if, she's actually living the nihilism conundrum, that you have to make up your mind at every moment of your life whether your life is worth living or not, and then choose which one you're going to do. So would you say that, she's a bit nihilistic in certain bits?
I guess so. I guess that she does suffer from having to live with that conundrum. And I don't think that everybody does. And so, yeah, that is an aspect of her character. But that makes her sound terribly solemn. She is much more playful than that would suggest. She's quite funny. She's totally unjudgmental in her choice of friends. She's got a wicked sense of humour. She has really good relationships with her family, despite her rocky teens. And does a worthwhile job that she enjoys doing. And so, yes, she does live with this big conundrum, and she does think of herself as being somebody who has to constantly try and justify whether or not their life is a worthwhile thing. But she's also like quite a nice, fun person, really.
Yeah, I love the nudist scene.
Oh,
That's such a little, moment when clothes
yeah.
are just dropped off people. And it is unbelievably well done and beautifully British as well, I have to say. Because, there was no frisson of sexuality. It was just the amazing sense of, of why am I still here with my clothes on? When all these middle-aged people are prancing about in the nude. I have to say that it's really, really beautifully done. The other thing that strikes me about the book is, now that I'm thinking about it, is that it is rich and deep in feminine characters, in women. There are lots of very exciting women whom we'd love to meet. And of course, I think, the father is someone who's kind of like a rock, because he's just able to take all this punishment and keep going. He just,
Yeah.
everything's falling around, but he's kind of stoically the best of stewardship male in a way. And then there is the sperm donor who comes and goes in 10 pages.
You call him his bone donor. I called him a boyfriend, but there we go. You called him that. He doesn't stick around for long. That's true.
Yeah, but so in creating this, this, I think there are three generations of women whom whom we meet. And how did you work on, sort of delineating each one of them, kind of making sure that they didn't seem like echoes or shadows of each other?
Ooh,
I'm asking
I don't know if
it's actually.
yeah, I don't know if I consciously did, really. I mean, some people have said that parts of Marianne are like me, like some of the places that she's been, or some of the jobs that she's done, and things like that. And then other people have said, "Oh, you must have based the mother on yourself," and I wasn't sort of aware of that at all, really. The I don't know if I'm delineating the characters. When I first wrote this book, there were a lot more children in that family. I started off with loads of them, like we were a really big family. And so Marianne, when I first wrote that story, she had two more sisters and one more brother. So when I first invented these characters, and I was filling this house with these characters, it was quite a big old falling down house. It had loads of windows. I was putting one person in each window in my mind, and there were loads of windows. So this family is huge. And then every time I wrote it, I cut more people out. And I think it made the story stronger because I realized at one point that the function, particularly of one of the sisters who's now disappeared from the story totally, I realized that her function in the story was to simply not be like Marianne. And I thought that is a lazy writer's reason for having a character, is to have somebody there to be not somebody else, and to simply react differently to things, or to make that other character seem stronger by being unlike her. And I just thought that's lazy writing. That is not a good enough reason to have a character just because it makes it easier to show what somebody is not. I thought, no, she's got to go. And there was an older character as well, a much older half sister who I also wrote out. And I think that the character who I wrote out last, the older half sister, was the one who was actually more like me than anybody. So I think at about the fourth draft of the book, I wrote myself out of it, in as far as I was in it. So I didn't then worry about having the characters very delineated, very different to each other that were left, because what I had left was like a sort of skeleton crew of the original cast. And I think I've made a lot of space around them by clearing out those other people. And so they felt more distinct and more distinctly themselves because of that. I wouldn't recommend it as a method of writing a book, by the way. It's like, invent like massive big load of characters and then just keep cutting them out until you're left with a few. It takes far too long. I wouldn't set about it again like that.
I was going to ask, it sounds like this novel went through several drafts and several iterations. How long did it take you eventually?
Well, the original characters that were invented in the old building, that was a homework for school.
Sure.
My teacher refused to read it, by the way, because it filled the whole book, because I got completely carried away. I was really enjoying it. And he said, there's no way I'm reading all this, just take it away and shut. But that was actually, I was still at school when I invented them. And then when I came back to live in the village, like a lot later, that house had actually been demolished, which was really weird because in my story it always gets destroyed. And I came back to the village and went looking for it on my bike, and I got to the end of the lane. I was looking, just thinking, I don't remember it being over there. I thought it was more in that field over there, and it had gone. It just completely gone. So that's how long it took. That the original setting had fallen down and been demolished.
You could say your book grew out of the ruins of that barn.
Maybe I didn't even know it had fallen down, but there you go.
So, what was one of the things I think that another huge risk, and I see this as a very ambitious novel, was that there is what you might call a lament that runs through the book. It is, and I think because you choreograph everything so well, the comedic scenes and the self-awareness, one does not get bored, or find it monotonous. But grief can actually be very tiring, very fatiguing. Was writing the book tiring and fatiguing in a way? Because
No, not at all, really. I mean, I wish I'd sort of managed it a bit more efficiently. I mean, my writing method's got to be, among the most unproductive ever invented. But no, it didn't. I think that the thing that runs through the book that I see is like the sort of the layer of the book that is the lament. I'd always heard that in my mind as songs. So that's why I kept putting like songs and children's rhymes all the way through the book. So I was sort of aware of wanting to keep all these different balls in the air, juggling all these different parts of the story, different levels. And one of the really important levels to me was the songs. And that to me was like a musical lament going under it all. And so I didn't find that. No, I didn't find that was difficult. I just wanted to constantly keep bringing the song back in somehow.
Let's talk a little more about the songs as because I come from a tradition, a storytelling tradition, where songs are very important to the stories. Whether it's in the theatre or in our films, songs are very important because they underline or they move the narrative forward.
Yeah.
In the songs that you've chosen, most of them have that quality of the light nursery rhyme, the skipping song, and yet awful things are being suggested behind them. Like
Oh
that.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, when I there were some songs in that I always wanted in it, and one is the Green Gravel song. That was one of my mum's favorite songs, and it's about a grave. And I always wanted that song in, and I wanted the Raggle Gypsies song in because that again, my mum used to sing all the time. And then I wanted like the nursery rhyme clips. It's in the original poem. There's like a little link word in each section, or that word's repeated at the top, and then it links to the stanza after. It's like a little chain. So I wanted the songs to be like a little link in a chain.
Mm.
And I did some research. I did know quite a lot of playground songs anyway from being a child in the playground, and some of the ones in there are ones that we used to sing. But when I started looking for children's songs and rhymes and things that were about death and burial rituals or visits from ghosts, so those were the things I was looking for in children's rhymes. Basically, I had almost every children's rhyme in the world to choose from. They're pretty much all about death and burial and visits of ghosts, as far as I can see. Transmigration of the soul reappearing in the form of trees or birds or musical instruments. And if you'd set out to try and find lots of nursery rhymes to put in your book that were about cheerful things, you'd struggle. I had loads of choice.
It's. I also found the latter half of the book was very very beautiful in the sense that without us actually being told, we can feel the slow healing of the character. And the fact that I think motherhood brings a new wound, but a fresh kind of wounding, to her soul. It was very beautifully balanced, I think. Uh, was wondering how, sort of, how did you work on that section? Because it seems to have grown from the inside out, actually.
Yeah. Well, strangely enough, I didn't really write the sections in order. It was a very good piece of advice that a friend of mine who writes detective novels told me when I was getting stuck in the middle of the book. And she said, well, why are you writing them in their order? Just write them. And so I was writing whichever bit I felt I could write in whatever order I felt I could write them, and then I tried to put them all back together. And so I think that there were times when it was nice to be able to turn to a part of the story where I felt that there was more hopefulness and more healing, and to sort of move freely from one section to another.
And
then.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, not so.
I think there's a Philip Larkin poem somewhere where he says that, if he were called in to start a new religion, he would use water. And I'd like to talk a little about the water motifs that run through the book and the fire motifs that run through the book, because both of them are very strong, elements there.
Yeah, well, obviously I needed a river for my plot. The river actually doesn't go through my village; it goes through the next one along. So a lot of people who read the book locally are going, "That's not, that river's not there. What's this? It's in the shop match. It's not here." So I moved the river a couple of miles along onto the next parish, and so obviously I needed the river for the plot, but the river in the Pearl poem is obviously the river he goes to visit there. He basically visits the Book of Revelations and he visits the River of Death and he sees paradise on the other side of it. So I was very aware that having this water motif running through it, that it was partly the link of her, it meant home to her. That this was a part of her childhood, an important part of her landscape. But it becomes a very important part of her mental landscape because that river of death is the one that she has to constantly negotiate.
Right. It is also a readerly book, I think, because there are many other texts that keep surfacing. I think Alice in Wonderland, for instance, certainly surfaced
Yes.
things. I think one can draw a line between, the bereaved father sleeping, falling asleep beside the grave, and Alice falling asleep beside a hole and slipping
Yeah.
down into it and ending up in a
Yeah. And
transformative
trickling
landscape.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how
Yeah.
did the
Yeah, I hadn't deliberately drawn on Alice, but I suppose that whole idea of the dream vision is like such an ancient tradition in poetry and in literature that somebody can slip away from the world they're in and into a dream vision. That sort of goes like right back to really, really ancient texts, doesn't it? It's sort of in lots of things. But there were some books that I put deliberate little sort of thank you notes in to authors who I really love. So I put like little messages in there. And I'm surprised that not very many people have found them. But there's one text that I really love, an Anne Tyler book called Saint Maybe. And I really love that book. And I wanted to put in like a little sort of thank you note to Anne Tyler in my book. So when Marianne and Susanna are naming the little models of angels that they're putting up their stairwell, they name them alphabetically because the angels are going up the stairs, and they name them Abby, Barney, Cindy, Davy, and they stop. And those are the alphabetical names of the children in Dan Tyler's Saint Maybe. Yeah, the main character, Ian's older sister, Claudia, has so many children that she names them all alphabetically, and the first four are Abby, Barney, Cindy, Davy. And I thought it was a really, really obvious little borrowing to put it in. Say thank you, Anne Tyler, for many, many hours of pleasure reading your books, and especially to Saint Maybe. But yeah, so there are like a few little deliberate links to other texts, sometimes as thank you notes, like that one.
Yeah, you said something about your writing style being inefficient. Is there a difference between how do the poems come? Are the poems also produced inefficiently?
Inefficiently. No, well, I think I probably write so much poetry because nobody ever says to you, you really need to write some poetry. It's very important. Go in your room and write some poetry, you know? Whereas, like, certainly my agent has for the best part of 20 years been saying to me, for goodness sake, finish a book I can sell. Will you please? Will you stop being so unproductive and unprofitable for me? I've definitely been his worst client ever since he opened his agency. But if somebody says to me, oh, you really need to, do this piece of writing, immediately your brain starts thinking of some other piece of writing that you're really going to do instead. And so I think of poetry as playing, and I open my computer and some people go on solitaire, or I don't know what they do. They play on their computer, they buy things on eBay or something, I don't know. But when I go on my computer and I want to play because I'm putting off writing the next difficult chapter or doing the thing that my agents told me to do, I write poetry. It's where I go to play. So in fact, I write lots of poetry. Because no one's ever told me, Sean, write a poem. So because I've never been told to, I somehow or other find it really easy to get on with it.
And on which happy note, I think I should say thank you so much, Hughes, for being with
Not
us,
at all.
and happy playing.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your interesting questions. It's lovely to meet you in person.
Sure, at some point. Allah Malik.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, sort of in person. And I really did enjoy your piece of writing about the book. I
Oh, I'm
thought you
glad.
noticed things that other people hadn't noticed at all.
Hmm.
And your questions about being a poet who writes a novel, like they were the most interesting questions that anybody had sent me.
Lovely. Happy to have met you, even if it was on Zoom. And let's hope that sooner or later we will cross paths. Okay,
Yeah,
Shantanu.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
Shane.
much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
We thank the authors for such a stimulating session, and a big thank you to our sponsors who make this possible. Title sponsor Tata, in association with NCPA, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Safari, and powered by Godrej and Kotak. We have many such conversations lined up for you. Coming up next is Buddha's Wife, where the session explores a writer's journey to self-discovery and how that can fuel and inspire their fiction. Thank you for joining us today and have a great evening.